As you know, I always love saying hello, and I always love welcoming everybody to Refresh. Why? Because this is a time to connect, be inspired, to learn something, and ultimately feel a bit better for this time spent together. What are we talking about? We're talking about positive community connection. And that's what W is all about. So here we are on this beautiful Wednesday. I am quoting you, Jill Metlin. This is a great day to have a great day. I might have to use that every single show. And this is for our monthly refresh. Over the summer, we decided we would gather monthly. So this is welcome to our July session of Refresh. And when I think about where we are today, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be assumptive. I mean, I know we're in all different places, but there are definite themes. Don't you think? Definite themes. I was just talking to Kimberly and Sherry about this as well. When I started working this morning, I started thinking about Back to the Future, and I wasn't exactly sure. So I said, Sherry, tell me what Back to the Future means to you. So of course she talked about the movie. You've watched it, raise your hand, right? Michael J. Fox and his adorable self and Christopher Lloyd. But Sherry reminded me that they went back in time into the past so that they could change the future. And I thought about that. I said, was that the resonant message I was kind of like looking for or trying to find? So in a sense, maybe, because I wish that we could go back in time to change the future. And specifically, I wish we can go back and have everyone who is capable of getting vaccines do so. Because I don't know about you, but I'm feeling this tremendous deja vu all over again, the pressure, the anxiety of a virus, of the pandemic that just will not leave us. And I suppose if we could travel into the future, inverse that trip and validate and verify, right? To mediate any of the concerns that people who are not getting vaccines have, that would probably be a good thing, that these vaccines are not ticking time bombs in our bodies, as some would have us think, or miniature radios that somehow are going to be activated to create a global network of control. That would be helpful to persuade some. But here we are once again. And I just got to tell you straight up, I do not like masks. It's not a political statement. It's recognizing their proven benefits, but I felt like we were making progress. But here we are, got to put them on again, right? And I feel a little bit like we're in quicksand. And I have to say, I feel a little tremor of terror as people around me are getting exposed and getting sick. And really, when I think of change or changing our trajectory, we can do it. And I'm hoping that we all can and will. And I think in my heart of a phenomenal doctor, an amazing man, you guys know Dr. Leon Haley, who sadly in a tragic accident passed away this week. He ran all of UF Health here in Jacksonville, an African-American man, the first man to get vaccinated in the state of Florida. One of the last things he did before he left the hospital to go on vacation was walk around and give out vaccines to the member of his health team. Hey, if you can do it, think through what it can mean, not only for you, but for your family and for your community. Now, when I think of change, I'm going to just make a total 180 on this. And how many of you are watching the Olympics? Confession, always have been an Olympic junkie, always enjoyed the competition. It's another reminder of the altered world we're living in, no fans in the stands, really lots of noise about whether it should be happening or not. But I have to tell you at the foundational level, I'm just so happy that athletes who have worked their entire lives to compete have that chance to compete. And along with that, a personal pet peeve of mine has been women's uniforms, right? It's a much longer story here, but I've always thought about, to this day, the dread I felt. I competed on our gymnastics team. Yes, not exactly the body type you would think. Putting on that green leotard and feeling, oh, why do I have to wear this? But I want to say thank you to the German women's gymnastic team, who took the major step, I don't know if any of you saw that, to begin to change the dynamic of what women could, should, and can wear to compete. There you are, leggings. It works. And how about the Norwegian women's beach handball team? Have you heard about this? The beach handball team has to wear those thongs, as you see in our regular beach volleyball teams. they were fined 1,500 euros for improper, check this out, for improper clothing. That is improper clothing. Why? Because they did not adhere to the dimensions of that, whatever that thing is that goes up your butt. I don't know about you, but I was just really never comfortable competing at my best with things up my butt. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to all of these women who are raising their hands, trying to change the narrative. And actually, that is our theme today, right? It's about creating change. It's about building inclusive community, beginning with better understanding each other. That is what 904 Forward is about. And that who is our guest, who has been the leader since its inception rather recently, but certainly a founding energy among many in a community to create that inclusivity and talk about change. So I want to say particular welcome to Dr. Kimberly Allen. Prior to her work with 904, she served as the Director of Data and Research for the Jacksonville Public Education Fund. Whoa, I sit on that board. It is where I first met Dr. Allen. And as I told her, I've always been a huge fan. She has this incredible fierceness, but it's a quiet fierceness. She has this intellectual curiosity. She has this foundational belief in data. And it's interesting because as I read more about her, because you don't have these conversations about people you work with or when you meet, right? You just don't, but now today we can. But she used to conduct extensive research about the well-being of African-American males in our city of Jacksonville. These roles led her to bolster her service to the community and identified a need to understand data and the stories they tell. Her mission is to make people fall in love with data and use it to make key decisions with, for, and about the people served. And she brings that, actually, all of that, to her incredible work today that we can talk about, which is how to connect communities, as she says, to begin to understand each other with a vision, really, to eliminate racism in our city. But truthfully, it's racism and any kind of otherism that comes from being disconnected. So Kimberly, Dr. Allen, Kim, welcome today. So happy you're with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna.
Of course. I mean, listen, I don't know if you want to comment on, competing with things, inappropriate uniforms, like what is proper? Oh my goodness, right? Or the fact that we're all really terrified of COVID. All of these things are happening, but we're all going to talk about really your work with 904 Forward. But our family and welcome to everybody from Generation W across the country. We're so glad to be with you. This will be a conversation for us all. You ready?
I am ready.
All right. So as I told you, I just wanted to start with, where did the Kim Allen of today come from? What happened in your growing up, your life experiences, your education that brought you to this incredibly important place as the leader of 904 Forward?
Honestly, so Donna, I'm a Jacksonville native, and so this is home for me. I have this, particular, and I see it in a lot of folks who are native and people who have come to call Jacksonville home. It's a very special place, and it's the place where I want to see my life's work come to fruition. And being from here, my parents, my family are from the east side, from out east, if you're from Jacksonville. And I tell this story all the time, but I watched my grandparents take care of the community. I watched my grandmother feed the neighbor across the street who didn't have any children or any family here with her. I watched my grandparents on my dad's side feed the children from the neighborhood who are not their children. And mind you, I come from a large family. My mother is one of 12 and my dad is one of 10. And so you would think that coming from that large of a family, that the focus is on taking care of this large family. But in reality, it has been the caring for other people, the caring for community, the love that the members of my family have been able to show to others around us that has really been instilled in me. And it's a love for community that I have, and the reason that I want to see change happen here in Jacksonville.
Wow, that's 22 aunts and uncles?
Yeah, probably, yeah, something like that.
Wow, do you have family gatherings both sides? Or even if you had 12 on one side and 10 on the other? Oh my goodness.
Yes, the family cookouts are rather large and fun, and but COVID has made that a little bit difficult. So I empathize when you talk about the struggle of COVID, because it's all of those folks that I can't hug and I can't kiss and we can't, be together. My grandmother, my only living grandmother is 96 years old, and I can't go and hug her and be with her, even because we want to protect her and keep her as safe as possible.
Right. I just have to say, Sharon LaShore Roy just piped in. We also have to congratulate her on her new job, right? VP of social media for ViStar. Sharon, we always know you're going places. Wherever you go, we're with you. Just want to let you know, right?
That's right.
Awesome.
Congratulations, Sharon.
And also we have one of your board members who's going to pipe in here and there, and that's Myra Martello. She's in Columbia today, but she knows a lot about communities. But why don't you tell us all about 904 forward.
90 forward.
Okay. I look at it, 90 forward. By the way, those of you who don't know, the area code in Jacksonville, Florida is 904. And so it's the combination of 90 forward, which, by the way, that's who we are here.
That's who we are. So we actually got our start back in 2015. And I would describe the climate as very similar to what we were experiencing last summer with George Floyd and with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, minus the pandemic. The videos were going viral, and unarmed Black people were being just tragically and brutally murdered and killed, and we needed a place to process, right? So there were a group of folks who came together to say, like, we need to talk through this. What does this mean? We know each other from the work we do together. We partner together. Our organizations work together. We might even go to happy hour together, but we haven't had this conversation. It's a different kind of conversation. And so in 2016 is when I came aboard, and it was right after Philando Castillo was killed, and it's the young man who was killed in the car with his girlfriend and his child in the back seat. And I was completely rocked because I have two small children, I have a husband, and that the image of that really traumatized me. But I think that day I showed up and I just was not myself. I locked myself in an office, and I was in tears. I was physically present, but I was not mentally present. And so one of my colleagues said, "Hey, you should come upstairs and join us for this conversation, because we talk in a space." And I was really skeptical. I will not lie, because when I have these conversations, or prior to that moment when I was having these conversations, it was with my family, it was with my mom, it was my dad, it was people that I really and truly trusted with these emotions, because there was a shared experience. And quite frankly, because we all had our own testimonies. And so when I showed up in this room, and there were white people, there were Asian people, there was a mix, there were men, there were women, just a cadre of people who were willing to have this conversation. That really propelled me to say, okay, we can really do this. We can have these conversations across the aisle. But there were some geniuses in that room that day. One of them being Sonny Gettinger, Alicia Summers, Tracy Towsey, Imani Hope, Daryl Willey, like some incredible people. And they said, we need to figure out a way for us to be having this conversation across the community. We know that we have it. We know the questions that we're asking each other, but there are these questions that the community probably wants to have. And so thus the race cards were born. That's these little puppies here. And it's a deck of literally discussion questions. So we went back and forth, and we put questions that we were asking each other, the tough questions, the hard questions about race and racism, and just how we were feeling. Very, raw conversations. People were being very vulnerable. People had experiences that some folks just had no, clue about. Someone lived in Riverside, and they were stopped by the police and told that they couldn't possibly live there. A Black person who was renting an apartment over there. So there are things that were happening that folks just had no idea about. And we wanted to help other people have that conversation. So that's how the race cards were born. And that's what really forced us into becoming a nonprofit in the first place in 2018. And then we've been in this space of being a nonprofit since then.
Great people coming together with an earnest desire to make a difference, right? Which lets us know like so many things can happen. Let me just say from our Facebook, Hope McMath, an amazing.
Hope was another person in that room. Yes.
Right. And Hope said, you're a great leader, which is really nice to have that validation from the great Hope McMath. And hello from Irene Cheng Britt. Hey, Irene, we're so happy that you're with us as always. But there was a kernel of something you said, which I think is so important. We really don't ask each other the questions that we really want answers to. It's not malicious. It's not from a place of ignorance, but what prohibits us from taking that step and asking the questions that will inform and engage us in building the kind of communities that we want?
Fear. Very simply, it's fear. It's fear of being misunderstood. It's fear of being judged. It's fear of saying the wrong thing. It's fear of repercussion and blowback. There's just fear on all sides, from communities of color, from white people. There's just fear, and I think we have, as a society, allowed fear to paralyze us because we're afraid of the unknown. Someone has been talking to me a lot about embracing the unknown. And I think that is very true for being in this space. You don't really know exactly how things are going to turn out. But if you go in with the purest of intentions and you're building those relationships with people of trust, you can ask them those questions without sort of the blowback or having the negative things come back to you that you think will happen.
So you said something. I'm going to hold on to that for a second.
Yeah.
What we have started to do is we got to do polls, which is a way that we can engage everybody. So actually, we do have a question. Sherry, if you want to put the poll question about fear. What is the role that fear plays in people's understanding race and racism? None, a little, some, or great amount. Actually, I thought we had different answers on this one, but we just heard Dr. Allen say it's a great amount. So let's I actually thought
I spoiled your question.
I know. I actually thought I'm sorry, this is just me being a little behind. I actually thought we were going to ask, why is fear so potent? Which you also add. So everybody, hey, I can do this. I'm going to put great amount. Hold on. All right. Sherry, whenever you're ready, you can pop it back up and let us know. In order to, there you go. Some, a little. Okay. So here's my question to you. Again, listening to what you're saying, you talked about trust. So in order to overcome fear, right, we only reveal ourselves when we feel we can trust the people we're with, right? So in a time when institutions are failing us, we don't trust them. Pick one. We're not going to be out there. Right? We've seen the ramifications. It's funny. Myra says it's a fear of being brave, right? What happens when I step out? But if in fact 904 Forward is about person to person, building a little group, like we saw that beautiful little table of people really engaged, and then building community from that, it's about building little places of trust.
That's right. And Donna, I always say this, trust start, I think, in your own circle. I can't be the messenger everywhere. And I shouldn't be the messenger everywhere. But for example, when we host the race cards conversation and folks show up and I say to them, you go and tell your friends about what you've experienced here because they trust you, right? They trust you as a person. And so if you say this is a safe space for you to enter, to have this dialogue and share your experiences, it feels better and it comes from a different place than if I say, trust me, who you've never met before, to come into this space and talk about race and the impacts of racism. Because this isn't about a guilt trip. This isn't about, making you feel shameful. I do want you to feel convicted if there are things that, you need to reconcile with, but there is a road, if you will, to redemption. There is a pathway. There is a way out of, sort of the fog that exists around understanding race and the impacts of racism. But I can't always be the one to deliver that message. And so it does involve us creating spaces where people then go out and become ambassadors for the message.
Right. And that's what this is, right? We're saying we are a safe place. We can be trusted. If you want to be one of those people to be trusted, which means you have to be vulnerable in that process, right? And that works as long as that is continuously replicated.
Right. Right. So we have a lot of training that we send our facilitators to. We set ground rules on the front end because we want people to really lean into that discomfort, because it's not going to be an easy conversation. And if it is easy, it's probably because we're not doing it right. But there are points in there where you should be able to examine some of the experiences that you've had, and really understand how those early experiences have shaped who you are and how you interact with people of different races and ethnicities, or how you interact with the world, or how you empathize and understand people who have, racial bias, or in some cases may even be racist.
Absolutely. So Winifred, thank you for asking. By the way, everybody here, please throw in your questions and we will take them as we go. Winifred, I think she was the person who said that she saw you, met you somewhere and loved you. Why can't teachers teach the truth of our history? Is that about fear?
I think it's fear mixed with a little bit of power and politics. There is this fear that I've heard over and over, that we will teach children to hate America, and that tends to be far from the truth. What I find is when we are vulnerable and we tell the truth of our history, from like literally history, historical, and our own personal histories, the more vulnerable we are, the clearer the path becomes again to sort of that redemption, or that action, or the thing that we will do together to make this world a better place. But we have to be willing to lay it out on the table. And unfortunately, a lot of politics have gotten in the way, and we have moved, or are starting to, or continuing to move away from what is most important here. And that's making sure that people really understand who they are, where they come from, how this country got its start, and how we are seeing the things and the outcomes that we're seeing today.
Oh, without a doubt. And I just want to add, January, we have our Facebook friends as well. Because the tone of the world, people are very squeamish and don't know how to communicate. They feel that conversations will not end in understanding, but debate and nothing understood. By the way, I should say guilty here. Sometimes that happens in our house, right? I'm just like, I'm in a state of disbelief. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? But thankfully, we have ongoing conversations and we can move through that. And there is this basis of trust. And Miss Martin says, fear often undermines truth. It takes courage, going back to that word, to be able to look at yourself, ourselves collectively, and face some incredibly horrific and ugly truths. That's us. We did that. We thought that. We perpetrated that. We're condoning that. Some people are saying, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, but it's hard.
Right? But necessary.
But necessary.
Right? Doesn't real growth come from pain? There's other ways to get real growth, but honestly, from recognizing that.
Yeah, I think we have become conditioned to, in particular, like if I think about social media, right? We become conditioned to the likes and the positive affirmations, that it becomes a little bit more challenging to hear the things about ourselves that are not as pleasant, that are critiques, right? That is constructive feedback. But it's that part of it that we hear that we can grow from. And so an example, we were having a conversation with the company a couple months ago, and a young lady said, well, I grew up in a household and my father would say racist things and would say racial slurs. And I never said those things, right? I knew that that was bad, and I never said those things. So, maybe I feel like I love everybody and all of these things. And so one of the other um, people who were in, one of the other persons who was in the group, she said, so you may not have said those words that he said. Um, but how many times did you cross the street when there was a person of color who looked suspicious to you, however you want to define suspicious? How often have you, you know, uh, you know, really just had an adverse reaction and you probably didn't think of it? It was second nature, right? And the first thing I would say is, one, we all have our biases, right? That's how we are alive today, because our brain makes snap decisions on a regular basis about situations, people, places, and things. Um, but what she said in that moment was, I hadn't really thought about it. And I know that there are things that I have done that I have acted on impulsively or by second nature, looking back on it, realizing that it's probably some of the teachings. It may not have been his words, but some of the teachings may have manifested themselves in me growing up. And so that's to say, a lot of times we think of, racism or bias as this grotesque act of, killing someone or calling someone a vulgar name. But there are these little actions along the way that add up, that folks just um, that tend to perpetuate some of the outcomes and some of the interpersonal conflict that we see, that we overlook.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. These are questions of personal awareness, but it becomes personal reckoning. Mm-hmm. We can do that in a safe place where we are not incredibly, we don't become overly judgmental, because that will chase us away from this space that will help us learn. And it's like that across everything. Race is hard to talk about. It doesn't have to be as hard as it is if we can continue to build trust and a belief that we want to be better together. Correct?
That's right. That's right. And being honest about, I don't have all the answers. I don't have all of the right words. I'm here to learn. And so whatever that form that takes, just being open about that and not feeling like you have to come in knowing everything or knowing all the language or knowing all the right words, just with a vulnerable heart and an honest spirit and willingness to learn.
I got to write that one down. Come together, vulnerable spirit, honest heart. You guys should put this up in your office, and willingness to learn. What more do you need? But I'm gonna ask Myra to join us here for a second, because Myra's been involved in community conversations in so many different ways. Proud to have participated with her in our Voices of Our Students. And now she's also got a new big job working around community engagement. My question here is, how do you get people in the room who are not already predisposed? Are we not preaching to the choir? Or how do we get people who are around the edges and start to bring them in so we can get more and more people, right, who really are afraid of this perhaps, or don't feel like they can enter this space safely? Myra, how would you address that? We are testing our technology, our international technology now, aren't we? If you're talking, we can't hear you. Oh, she lost her internet connection. Thanks, Regina. I did not do that. When she gets back, Myra, just let us know and we'll pop to you. But I'll throw that to you, Kim, right? Because I have participated in this, by the way. I've done the United Way race questions. Mm-hmm. I still think about the moments and the people I met, the young men I met, how different they were, how impactful they were on me, honestly. But then again, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I want to learn more. Mm-hmm. Are there enough of us who want to do that?
I think that there's enough. I think the challenge is that entry, getting folks to enter the space in the first place. So I think there are a lot of people who would agree with you that, racism is wrong, and that it shouldn't happen, and that people of color have just as much to share, contribute, and, they're valuable, for our society. But how do we pull folks to the table? And so we were actually just in the staff retreat the other day, And we use this analogy of church, right? Because the idea is what we're preaching to the choir. And so that we ask ourselves a couple of questions, one of which is, how do we convince people that even if you aren't in the choir, you still belong in the church? And then how do you convince people that they actually need the church at all? And so, that's an analogy, but the idea being, you may not be fully bought in, but we still need you at the table. How do we bring you and not well convince you, or how do we address the barriers that you feel to being a member of this group, or sharing this information, or intaking the information so that you can go and share it. And then for folks who have, just are disengaged, kind of on the side, they see it's happening, I'm not really interested. And I think we have a lot to learn from people who have made the transformation. Right. And so that's kind of where we've landed. How do we learn from the folks who have been on the sidelines and said, I see this thing happening over here, I'm not sure it's an issue, racism is a problem, to now being completely like, oh yes, it is a problem, and now I am learning and I'm advocating for change. And so I feel like if there is a way for us to, I don't want to say package it, but if there is a way for us to capture the process of what it looks like from going to being on the sidelines to being completely engaged and now being an ally and advocating, then we owe it to ourselves to explore that and share that message out loud so that others can see what's possible in the process that it took for some of even our own community members to get there.
So let me ask you a question, maybe a bold question, but Myra's always encouraged me to be bold. Is there a racial breakout or demarcation in terms of the people willing to engage in this conversation? Are white people more hesitant than people of color to come to these tables?
I've seen both. I've seen hesitancy on both sides. I've seen hesitancy certainly from white people, because there's a fear. And the main fear here is, I'm not racist. I don't want to be called racist. I don't want people to think I'm racist. That's a lot of the fear that I've sort of heard on that side from people who want to engage but are afraid to. On the side of communities of color, I've heard people say, I don't know if I'm willing to share this with folks who don't have this experience. I don't want to be responsible for educating other people. This is my life. I live it every day, and I don't know how to share that in a way other than my own lived experience. And so what I say to both sides is, there's value in your perspective and where you show up on the spectrum, regardless of where you are. And so in trying to encourage, communities of color, there are white people and other people from different communities of color who need to hear your testimony and your story. And then on the other side, there are people who need to hear your story and your experiences. We didn't just wake up today and decide that this is how we're going to present to the world. We all are shaped and molded by our experiences or lack of experiences in certain, places. And we deserve to tell that story, all of us.
We do. And it's so valuable, right? You want to know that you have a kindred spirit. You experience that. I'm experiencing that. All right. If we share that, then maybe we can get through a blockade, right? Of people who will not emote or express because of that fear that you're talking about on every side of this. Marianne just said something, my main fear is my ignorance. And you know what? Just being able to recognize we don't know is a good thing. Let's take a look at these race cards, because you've really used these as a way to engage people in these conversations. It's available on the App Store now, which is huge progress for you guys. I remember when these first came out, I don't know why I always think of Melanie Patz, said, oh, I'm working on this project, and look how far we've come. And here's one of the cards, and we've all been together. Sherry's going to call it up right now. Unfortunately, this is how you have to do it on Zoom. We're waiting for better technology, but we all do this, so we know what it is. Sherry, you want to show us the individual card? All right, so this would be one of the cards. So you can imagine why people would be afraid, Kim. You're going to sit down at a table with people you don't know, but you know that they're coming with, you hope, an honest heart and a willingness to learn. How did you first become aware of racism, right? You would think, oh my goodness, I don't even know when I don't even want to admit that I wasn't born with that. You know what I mean? In today's day and age, to lack any kind of blind spot feels like a huge, harsh way to be judged. So we've been together now for all of this time as our Generation Double community. People are responding, they're asking questions. So why don't we take this and offer it as a poll? Again, this is an anonymous poll. This is a place of trust. But let's see how vulnerable we're willing to be together. Sherry, you're just doing great back there, right? So we're gonna put this up as a poll. Can you tell me when you became aware of your racial identity? For our people on Facebook, can you tell me when you became aware of your racial identity? Racial identity would be your race, Kim, as simple as that?
Yeah, your race or ethnicity, however you choose to identify.
Okay, a young child in college, recently as an adult, not yet. We see interesting to see. I feel like I've had different levels of racial identity through my life. And probably some of the most important understandings have been more recent. Only maybe because they're so fresh, and maybe it's because we're in a world that's changing and so dynamic. I'm not exactly sure. But I'm interested in what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, I'm interested too. My exposure came as a young child, honestly. I have older brothers, and hearing my dad tell them stories was my intro, and I was elementary school age.
There you go. So here's the thing: most people feel from the time of a child. How does that impact your work? Understanding that people are exposed at such a, obviously, listen, you're born white, you're born brown, you're born black, right? You're born with a cultural identity, right? Based on your family. Those are all good things. It's not understanding that. It's really probably the juxtaposition to everyone else and the value set that we're communicating. You're worth more than this. You're worth less than this. That comes with that racial identity.
Right. And really, it's, when you are socialized as a child, it tends to be the positive things about your own racial identity, right? This is something to be proud of. These are the things you celebrate about yourself. It's when other people are interpreting other people's racial identity where we start to see some of the negative things come out. So, for example, my son was almost 3 years old when he came home and said from daycare and said that someone told him he was Black. And, at 2, almost 3 years old, although he could articulate that to me, he couldn't articulate the context under which that was shared with him. I don't know if that was, if they were saying it in a negative way, like, oh, you're Black, so, you have to go over here. Like, he couldn't share those things with me. But at home, when we talk about our Blackness, it is affirming, it is magical, it is, it's all of these positive attributes. But I have to also prepare them that when they enter the world, there are some folks who will not see the magic and the brilliance that comes with being who they are. And that's where sort of the intersection or the road collides, if you will. It's other people's interpretation of your racial identity.
Right. And we're all in some ways, or many ways, maybe all ways, impacted by what the world says to us. Also subject to personal interpretation as well, right? I always love those studies where a group of people are shown a photo and how incredibly different the interpretation of that photo is, right? It's, again, an ongoing reminder of we bring our own lens and filter to every situation. Right? And then how do we understand those lenses and filters and then be able to work collectively as a community? So I'm coming back to you. First of all, welcome everyone to Refresh. This is our July session with the amazing CEO of 90 Forward, Dr. Kimberly Allen. We're talking about community conversation and how do we bring communities together in a greater buy-in of equity, racial understanding, tolerance, and acceptance. Would that be fair? Kim?
That is entirely fair.
Okay, so Myra, we're talking about you've had such experience with community engagement and conversations. how do you get people who don't want to be a part of this, or actually people you want to be a part of this, to engage?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Donna. I am in Colombia. Thank you, Kim. She's so brilliant. I think that the model that Nine on Power has used since the beginning is really using personal connection. Because if you don't know me, and Donna, you and I have grown together so much. I'm so grateful for our relationship, because it's the personal connection that really allow us to be vulnerable, but also to be brave, to be able to say, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I experience this. Because unfortunately, most of us enter in the world thinking that the world is only what we have seen it, right? So there are people who will say, but no, I have never seen it. And I say, well, yeah, you might have never experienced it. For instance, I'm Latina, and I don't experience certain things as a Latina because I'm bilingual, my skin color, I have a doctorate. So it's different. But it's like actually the way of connecting and say, looking for people who are connected to people and say, hey, who else can you bring into the conversation? Because part of the challenge that I have witnessed, and especially living in the United States, is that there is a lot of guilt. And so many white people don't know what to do with that guilt, because it's like, if you're shaming me, that's a shutdown for the conversation. It's different to say, this is not something that you did personally, but this is a historical issue. So I think the personal connection, Donna, is like, and that's what we say, like the small conversations are really powerful, because you're most likely to be open and to listen to someone who you already have a connection with.
Right. Right. It's interesting. It makes me think of the macro scent, the macro, right? We have the micro, right? People get shut down. And interesting, there's a Carol, she kind of asked, what are the numbers? What's the ethnic mix of people in our discussions? I say ours, I've been part of one, whites, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, right? Because this is not just a white-black conversation, is it?
It is not, yeah.
Right? Or Myra, this is not just a white versus black. And
no.
Some people perceive the verses as opposed
Absolutely.
to, right?
Yes.
It's a difficult conversation. Difficult does not have to make it contentious. It means that it impacts our vulnerability, our sense of safety with our vision of the world versus what it is for other people.
Definitely. I think that, thank you for mentioning this, Donna. It's like, we are not aware in a city like Jacksonville of all the diversity that we have. And that's why even some scholars right now are talking more about the concept of privilege, not only white privilege, because we all have some levels of privilege, regardless of the ethnicity that we have. So I think the invitation is also like, there's so many, and I love, Donna, you were talking about the concept of intersectionality, correct? It's like, we don't show up in the world just as one identity, right? Like in the US, I became a Latina. When I was living in Colombia, I was just Colombian. There was not such a thing, right? Like, and even here, like my regional identity, right? Like I'm from Cartagena. That's sort of like my number one identity until I got to the States, and everyone was like, oh, you're Latina. And I'm like, am I what? I'm Colombian. So I think that's really important. And I love to see, like, under the leadership of Kim, that we are like embracing the Asian American community. That is not only one community, right? Like when you talk about Asian American, you have people from India, but also people from Vietnam, people from, other countries. When you talk about Africa, right? Like even religious, sometimes there's one characteristic that is more important to define your identity. But usually I would encourage people to think that we show up in the world in all those identities simultaneously.
Right. Thank you, Myra. That's really helpful. And I want to say that, Winifred, to follow up on that, why is it so easy to change laws for Asians and still no law for hate crimes against Blacks? And it's interesting you say that. I don't want to be glib, because when you're glib, you invite people to like believe what you're saying when you may not be sure, right? I can't say that laws have been changed for Asians. Actually, behind the scenes here, I've been doing some work with some national Asian groups, which we hope to bring to Refresh at some point. They would not say that it's been easy for them at all. And yet, there is no hate crime law for Blacks specifically. I'm going to throw that to you, Dr. Allen.
Yeah, I think because I think Winifred may even be talking about the anti-Asian hate law that the president just recently signed. And I think, again, I think these things are wrapped up in history. Um, as a country, we haven't fully reckoned with um, the hundreds of years that Black people were subjected to slavery. We haven't really wrestled with that at a national level. And so I think because we haven't, it's harder to pass laws. There was an I believe, an anti-lynching bill that took 200 attempts before I believe it just was lynching was abolished in like last year, 2020. I think it was a bill that Cory Booker put up. And it took that long. But I think our country is still wrestling with this idea. Again, I think if we can be vulnerable, right? Because I think we're talking about it on an individual level, but I think we have to be vulnerable as a country and say, these are the things that we are wrestling with. These are the mistakes that we made, and this we're not going to do this anymore. We are better than this, and this is how we can effectively move forward. Until we really sit, I say sit down, but sit down and have that conversation. Those kinds of laws will continue to be a challenge for us to pass.
Hope said, you're right. She said we still do not have anti-lynching laws on the books, though James Weldon Johnson started that work in 1917, right? Right? There's actually no equality laws around women also, right? I think we have 36 states. We still don't even have the ERA passed for women. It's interesting, and our ability and desire to look at that is important in shaping who we are as a people in the future. I just wanted to share with all of you, and not to proselytize here, but everybody has a favorite quote. Wherever you go, people say, what's your favorite quote? And mine has always been, since I've been in high school, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And yet we're being asked not to learn our history lessons. I love history for so many reasons. But before we leave, we always like to come together. We want to learn. It's clear we have so much more we can learn from you and your entire team's work here. But here, people are here from communities from all across the country, Kim, and they can benefit from these race cards and your work. But you put together 3 little lessons for us that we can take, and we always like to do that. This is Kim's lean into what makes you uncomfortable, right? Do we wake up every morning and say, how can I be uncomfortable today? Maybe that's one of the first lessons, because if we're a little uncomfortable, we'll make ourselves better. We make ourselves better, we make the people around us better. So why don't you take us through some of your lessons, Kim? Because I think they're so valuable.
Yes. So always starting at the beginning. That means going back and searching through the things that our families have handed down to us, that may not necessarily be the most appropriate things that we know to be the case now. And so that, it jumps to the last point, but that means that some unlearning has to happen, right? There are some things that are just embedded in who we are, things that we learned from church, things that we learned from aunts and uncles, things that we learned from people who were taught to fear other, that we have to go back and unlearn. And that is a daily process. And then understanding your pain points. That means that there is something, when you have these conversations, there is a point that everybody has that we're like, I'm here, but I don't want to cross over that line, or I don't want to cross over that threshold. And I encourage you to cross that threshold. Understand what is making you uncomfortable. The thing that makes your shoulders tense up, makes your palms sweaty, makes you stumble over your words as you're speaking. Note it. Live in it, sit with it, and figure out what it is about that particular topic, that particular word, that thought that is really giving you the anxiety. And really lean into that discomfort, and be willing to understand that there's not going to be a pretty bow on it. and then take the steps necessary to unlearn. That means learning new things. That means picking up new habits. That means engaging with different people who are whatever the other might be. We're talking about race right now, but it could be sexual orientation, it could be gender, it could be ability, it could be language, it could be a number of things. So unlearning means that you're learning something new, replacing those negative thoughts, those bad behaviors, those things with new and positive ones.
That's first of all, I am making a sign, Kim, and I am putting up unlearning has to happen. I think it is a daily thing. I think we learn so much stuff that we don't even know what we've learned until we examine it. And it doesn't even have to be big things. And in a world that's rapidly changing, if we want to look at technology, everything, then we have to unlearn some of the things we done so we can continue to learn and move forward. I love that. And I'm surrounded in my little desk office here with lots of, you can see hearts, and every day I am adding this, and I'm going to thank you and think of you every day for that. Christy, Christy, I want to say your name, Bagalos. She says, thank you, Dr. Allen 904, for all the work you're doing. Great presentation. And I'm proud to be a monthly donor to 904, even though I live in 863.
That's okay. We will accept love from any place that it comes. Christy, thank you. It's good to see you, or read your comment rather.
Right. And I love this from Sarah Tucker, actually being such a fan of musicals, but that great song from South Pacific, you've got to be carefully taught to hate and fear. Right, which is we all know. I would encourage everybody, if you can go online, get the app, the race cards, begin with your own small little group of friends, right? Even as friends, we tiptoe around each other. And maybe that's wise with some of our friends, I'm not sure. But find a trusted group that you can begin to have these conversations, and then see if you can build those muscles to expand. Your thoughts on that, Kim?
Yes, I'm a big fan of starting in your circle and starting with yourself. Ask yourself some of these questions and journal out your thoughts, because any sort of change that we want to see in the world always starts with me, with myself, me, myself, and I. So doing that homework and then branching out to those people who are closest to you and connected to you, to make sure that you keep the conversation going. It's not a one and done, and it's not a jump to the action. We constantly need to be revisiting conversations like these.
Right, and I'm sure you're grateful for Tiffany. You bought the race cards at the Juneteenth Melanin Market.
Yes.
Iris thanking you for your leadership, which is all good. So so these cards can be bought anywhere in the country, correct?
That is correct. They are, if you go to our website at 904ward.org, it'll take you to a link on Amazon to purchase the physical deck. We have released the virtual deck, the app. We realized that some folks are just like, give it to me on a phone and I'll run with it. It's the same sorts of questions, but that app, thanks to Mayo Clinic, Black Diamond, and Burnett Garcia for making that possible. And keep the conversation going.
Let's keep the conversation going, and appreciate the conversation today from you and from all of our Zoom guests and our Facebook guests, all of it. Again, I don't even know where I'm putting it. Unlearning has to happen. And again, how about these great words from Dr. Allen? Come together. People come together with a vulnerable spirit, an honest heart, and a willingness to learn. And as we think about that in every city in America, in every community in America, in our families in America, think of the change that we can make step by step. I always think an incremental step can create exponential change if, as you say, Kim, we just keep having the conversations. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us on Refresh today. I hope you're feeling a bit refreshed. I think we leave with a lot more questions than we asked, but that's good. It takes courage to ask the questions and to answer them. We will be back again at the end of August. Sherry, you were going to tell me, what's the date? Now I can't see it. Yes, I can. What is it? August 25th with Genevieve Pituro. Genevieve's pretty well known by this time. She left her job as a successful television marketing executive, picked up a pair of pajamas. I call her the pajama lady, but she's built a nationally known nonprofit called Pajama Program, providing pajamas and books to underprivileged children. But in that process, she educates all of us on how to change our own lives, always wanting to be better, by listening to our heart-voice connection and pursuing passions to achieve success. So this is really about defining and identifying passions. I know so many of you continue to talk about that, send us messages about it. So Genevieve will be here on August 25th as we refresh, as the summer, we say almost goodbye to the summer, but as school starts in many, many, many places across the country, our passions and our focus on ourselves continue because, Kim, as you said, it all starts here with us. And together at Generation W, we all want to help each other be our best selves. So hey, Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna.
Really, honestly, so admire what you're doing and support it. And really hoping today we could have taken that message and this methodology and hope that people around the country can really tap in. Everybody, be well, be safe, and please stay healthy. Bye-bye. And get vaccinated. Bye.